Okay, I had to work hard to get the camera into the right spot, but I think we should get moving into... So today we're covering Samuel chapter 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then I actually did a little bit of a commentary on a couple of Psalms. One of the things that's been kind of fascinating, and I didn't know was going to happen, is our readings for daily Mass right now are coming from the book of Samuel. And that's just sort of a happy coincidence, or maybe a work of divine providence. But it's kind of neat to be in the middle of the same story that we're talking about. Sometimes I feel like you also can feel where the people who wrote the lectionary chop things up a bit, and they don't cover everything. There was one story, with Samuel when he was called by God, and God calls him, and he goes to Eli, and God calls him, and he goes to Eli, and they cut out like his entire vision that he has about Eli and his family, and it skips like to the end of a chapter where it's like, and Samuel grew in wisdom and grace of God. And it's like, you skipped out, like, there's a whole thing here. So one of the things in the background of the story today is the Ark of the Covenant. What is the Ark? It contains the Ten Commandments. Yep. What else? What is it?
I imagine it's a chest of something.
Yes, a kind of chest. It was a box made out of acacia wood that was then covered in gold. And it's supposed to be carried with a couple of poles. They had these long poles that they also covered in gold. And who's supposed to carry it? The priests and the Levites. The priests and the Levites are in charge of the Ark of the Covenant. So, for the most part, it's probably an ornately designed box. But on the top of the box is a lid, and the lid is called the mercy seat. And on the lid of the box, they carved two angels. Anyone know what the angels are called? They're two cherubim, or what in modern English has become cherub. But I like the Hebrew pronunciation better because cherubim are the sort of ancient guardians of the divine throne of God. They're fierce things. They're not pudgy little babies with flappy wings. They're like the kinds of things that eat you when you're not supposed to be there. And so I say that because when you think of God and the cherubim, you have to think of them as being kind of fierce. You know, they're not just simple, they're not fluffy, they're not... Like I said, it's not like little giggling babies, unless they're little giggling babies with laser guns. You know, there's some danger in cherubim. Now, the ones on the lid of the ark are probably different than most of the other ones. Like the Sphinx in Egypt is a cherub. It's something that shows up in many different religions of the era in different locations. But the Sphinx is like a cherub, the divine guardian of the throne of the gods. Now, it would be an Egyptian cherub and not one for the Hebrews, but it's kind of like that. And that one is also very stylized, but they're often shown with four legs and kind of lion-like. Usually they have wings, but somehow they have two cherubim on the lid of this ark, and they reach out and they have wings that touch together. And there's a spot where they touch. That is considered by the Old Testament to be the physical dwelling of God on earth. And so you'll hear in the Psalms this phrase like God enthroned on the cherubim, God on his mercy seat, God who looks down from among the wings of the cherubim. It's all talking about their images, at least, of the lid of the Ark of the Covenant. So carrying the Ark of the Covenant is like bringing the presence of God to whatever situation or whatever place it is. It's a little bit puzzling for us in Christianity because we would ask, well, is God really there? If you think of Christianity, who is the Ark of the Covenant? In some ways, it would be Jesus himself, right? Not just an artistic representation, but the actual physical incarnate God who is here, the God-man. But in another way, the ark is also Mary, because the ark is the box that carries the presence of God. And so Mary is the one who carries the presence of God within her. In some ways, you could also call the church the Ark of the Covenant. But it's a little bit like if Jesus is God, Jesus always was God, was the divine presence on the Ark of the Covenant real? Did God really dwell there? Now, this is a bit of a puzzle that the Israelites are trying to sort through, because can God be contained in any physical space? The answer is no. Like, his presence fills all things. And so you'll find these meditations in the Psalms about the presence of God, like, who are we as a people that you would come to dwell among us when the heavens do not contain your presence, when, nothing can contain your glory, and yet we believe that you are present on the lid of our ark. So there's a sense of tremendous holiness and power. Now, part of the story is a little bit funny. The Philistines are some of my favorite characters in this story, because their judgment of the ark, while correct, is sort of like, you can feel a little bit of a different mentality than we have today. And I think that's really important. Like I said, it's kind of funny. So, this Ark of the Covenant is usually kept in the temple or the tabernacle. In this case, the temple of God is at Shiloh. And maybe with Samuel. Like, Samuel keeps the Ark of God. We noted before that that's strange because Samuel isn't a Levite or a priest by birth, but he seems to function as one. He seems to function as priest and prophet and king. But the ark is kept with him. So it begins by noting there is a fight with the Philistines. Now, the Philistines are this group. They're related to the Phoenicians. You remember we talked in our historical introduction, when do the Phoenicians invade the land of Israel? At the end of the Bronze Age. We talked about that time of upheaval between like 1400 and 1200 BC. That's when cities like Tyre and Sidon, the Phoenician cities, which are further north in Lebanon, are established. That's also when the Philistines come. So they arrive at a similar time to the Israelites, but the Philistines live on the coast. They're a seafaring people. They're related to the Carthaginians and a bunch of other sea peoples that migrated around the Mediterranean. They're sailors. You could think of them a little bit like ancient Vikings. Not the Minnesota Vikings who lose football games all the time, but the ancient Vikings that were fierce warriors that terrified the peoples of Europe and burned and destroyed cities and monasteries and all kinds of other things for just about, 500 or 800 years. The Vikings were a problem. So the Philistines are a little bit like ancient Vikings. Now, one thing that's really fascinating is from the Bible, you get the impression that these are really bad people who were grouchy all the time, and they wore like dark coats soaked in people's blood and, hacked people to death with axes. And if you look at things like their pottery, they actually were quite refined. Like, you can look at Phoenician pots. They found some of them, and they compare with Greek pots and like Greek culture. So you have to change your mind a little bit. It's not that they're a perfect people, but just that they have some artistic merit. There's some artistic qualities. They're not just barbarians all the time. They live along the coast. This is the area of the Gaza Strip. The Gazans, the modern-day Gazans, are descendants of the Philistines. When people wonder why the Israelites and the Gazans have been fighting for a long time, it goes back thousands of years. It's not a recent conflict. That doesn't make it right. I'm not trying to say that, but just that the Philistines and the area that they live in is along the Gaza Strip. Ancient Philistia was a little bit bigger than the Gaza Strip because now Israeli cities like Ashdod and Ashkelon, which are part of Israel now, were Philistine cities historically. The Israelites are fighting and they're defeated in battle. The Israelites, until the time of David, aren't all that good at making war. They're just not good at it. So they decide, we're going to bring the Ark of the Covenant next time. This is where the tablets of the law are kept. We talked about that. And so the Ark comes with the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas. Now, if you remember, they weren't good sons. They were stealing from God. They were sleeping with women at the courtyard of the tent of meeting. So, in the back of your mind, you should be saying, this ain't gonna go well. It's like watching things in slow motion. Some of you saw your kids do this. Like, you saw them begin the plans for something, and you're like, it ain't not gonna work. You should stop. And the Philistines have this kind of funny thing. So somehow the Philistines get word that the Ark of the Covenant has arrived in the camp of the Israelite army. And what is their conclusion? Holy war, Ben says. Kind of. They decide that it means that the gods have come to the camp of the Israelites. And who are these gods? Basically, the gods that destroyed the Egyptians, who were the most powerful nation in the world at the time. So somehow the story of the plagues of Egypt and the Nile turning to blood and all these other things, the death of the firstborn, has gotten up to the Philistines. Now, the Egyptians probably ruled the land of Israel at the time, so it makes sense. But so the Philistines are panicked. They're sort of panic-stricken because this has never happened before. You know, sometimes ancient armies carried an idol of the god into battle, the god of their city or whatever, but they knew that the idols weren't the gods themselves. In the case of the Israelites, they think that the gods have actually come to their camp. And now they're not going to fight against humans alone. They have to fight against a god. And that they don't think that's going to go very well. This god is going to afflict us, which actually ends up happening. They often, in the ancient world at this time, they thought of wars and conflicts between cities and nations as a fight between the gods. So, we beat you because our God is stronger than your God. Later, that creates problems because it means the gods of Rome are the strongest of all. And why are the Roman gods better than our gods? Like, there's all kinds of puzzles here that don't really make a lot of sense to us because we have a very different conception of God and how he works. But compared to ancient people, all of us would probably be killed as atheists, even for believing in God, because they had gods for practically everything. Storms and harvest and planting and fertility and sea monsters and on and on and on and on. Like, your life was lived in sort of constant divine tension. with these gods that in most ancient religions you have no control over. You have no say over what they do. They're whimsical. And some of them are mean. You know, they don't like you, so they turn all your cattle into horses and then kill them all. Those are the stories that their lives were filled with. Your mother died in childbirth because she angered the god of fertility. Those kind of things. That was the present mindset of the people. And it's a very different mindset than we have. We don't live in a world like that. And there's things that are very good about that. We can look at a woman in childbirth and see that bleeding large amounts is a physical thing and doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with the affliction of some god or another god. But there's part of it that we've lost. We've lost a lot of the mystery. We've lost a lot of the adventure of life. We've lost a lot of the sense of communion between us and spiritual beings. We live in a way that lends itself very much to materialism. That stuff is stuff, and 2 plus 2 is 4, and the sky is blue because of the warping of light and all sorts of things. And we don't have a good system of explaining belief like they used to. Like I said, that's for better and worse. It happens to the ancient Israelites as well. But to me, this is just sort of funny because the Philistines are beside themselves. Like if you were a soldier in the Philistine army, usually you're prepared to fight with sword and shield, and that still sounds horrible. I can't imagine hacking someone to bits, as a way of battle. But on the other hand, now you have to fight against a god. What do you do for that? Like you look at your sword and wonder if it's going to disappear in your hand, or the god is going to smite you, or, ruin your life, or all sorts of things. And so the Philistines give this kind of funny speech about, be manly and fight to the death, because otherwise we're going to become slaves and these Israelites are going to take over our land and steal our property. So Israel is defeated again. The ark is captured. The sons of Eli die. It doesn't go well just because you invoke the Lord. He's not a candy pot. He's not a vending machine where you put in your token and get out your prayer answer. That, I think, is an important thing to realize, that God is a person and his purposes are bigger than our purposes. And in this case, the Israelites probably are a bit pridefully convinced, like God is with us, and so what we do doesn't matter. And that doesn't work very well. God can be with you, that's true, but he still gave you a brain and he intends you to use it. And this, I think, is an important thing if you have kids or grandkids. You have to help them kind of connect with rationality and reason. Sometimes God can call you to things that are a stretch. That's true. And we have to be careful that we don't put limits on him. But for instance, God, it's very, very rare, not maybe impossible, but it's very, very rare, for instance, for him to call someone to be an accountant who doesn't like numbers and math. There's people who like working with their hands. They don't make good accountants. They're bad at it. It's okay to tell people that. Like when you watch a child, when you watch a grandkid and you see them, there's some of them where it's like, we'll support you in what you want to do. I think that's good to emphasize, but you should not go into construction. You hate building things. You hate getting dirty and working with your hands. That's not a good job for you. You're meant to use some reason with it. It's not divine will alone. It's not, well, God wants this of me, and it's like, can he do that? Sure, but usually you discover something inside of yourself that says, no, this is who I really am. Maybe it brings out a different side of your personality, but it's something that shouldn't feel alien all the time. When I was in high school, you do these aptitude tests and these different things, and I always tested high for things like engineering and computer science and those kind of things. I got a call from a Navy recruiter once that wanted me to come and be a nuclear physicist. That was easy to say no to. I hate physics. And the call to be a priest in some ways happened out of the middle of nowhere, but I'm glad, because I would have made a horrible computer scientist. I just get annoyed at the dumb things after a while, and I need to talk to people. And there's different kinds of things. Like, this is one of the things that people in med school have to realize, for instance. Some kinds of doctors are not very involved with patients. So people like radiologists spend most of their days looking at very high-end computer screens and funky black and white images of things, and lots of them hardly talk to patients at all. If you really like people, it's a very, very hard thing to be in. Computer science, computer programmers are almost all introverts. They like being on their own, they like working on their own, they don't like talking to people, they hate office meetings, that kind of stuff. And you need that kind of skill set to be a good computer scientist, because you spend a lot of time typing things in and tinkering and working like that. So we're meant to be logical, rational animals, Homo sapiens, wise man, not dumb man. Not man who just follows the will of God whimsically, but wise man. Now, like I said, there's an important openness to grace. God can call you to do things that are a bit outside of your comfort zone, and He does. But it's not usually like He calls you to something polar opposite of who you are as a life goal. You still have to weed a garden once in a while, even if you're a computer scientist. But you probably aren't going to own a greenhouse. And that's an important thing. You know, like, this happens in our lives, but we need to realize it. So news is brought to Eli. He's concerned about the ark. Again, Eli is this fascinating figure because he's not completely gone. He's not completely lost. He's concerned about the ark. He maybe didn't even want them to take it, but you know, they prevail on him, so he's waiting for news of the ark. The messenger brings the news that his sons were killed and the ark was taken, and he falls over dead. And this actually can happen. People that have an extreme shock can die from the news. In extreme fright, something that's very traumatic can be hard. The Israelites sort of mourn and lament that the glory has departed from Israel. Is God still with us if we don't have the ark? That's a tough question to answer, because if the ark is the place where God dwells on earth and you don't have that, then is God still with you? Are you still His people? Now again, we very easily would answer the question yes, because we have that very different conception of God that's operating. But for the Israelites, the answer that they seem sort of pushed toward is no, that God has departed from us. We're no longer His people. We lost Him. Maybe some of them realize, rightfully so, that it was because of sin. It was because of a lack of faithfulness. That's in the background too. Then it talks about Samuel growing, that he is a prophet from a young age. Age doesn't count for much in the eyes of God. It's about the heart. So the Philistines take the Ark of the Covenant and they put it in the temple of their god Dagon. I don't know what he is. Maybe it's related to dragon. I've always thought of him sort of like dragon, but whatever. It could just be a consequence of English. And when they put the ark in the temple of Dagon and they come back the next day, what happened? The idol fell down, like it's worshiping the ark. And it's sort of a funny image. It's like you thought that your God was more powerful, and now your God is like face down on the floor. And the Philistines are like, that's not supposed to happen. Like, taking care of the God's idol is an important thing. Like, this was something you could get murdered for. Like, this was a capital crime. They executed people for messing with the idol of the God. So they decide to put it back. Maybe they add some extra support around it. Like, it's easy. Oh, well, maybe the floor was unstable. We should reinforce it. So they do some things and they come back the next day, and this time it not only fell down, it's chopped into pieces. Now, it very well could be a stone thing, and chopping it into pieces isn't very easy to do. But the Philistines decide that this is bad news. Like, the story is that the ark is sort of afflicting them. And they try to figure it out. And their crops are failing, and their people are getting sick, and all sorts of things are happening. And it's all when this ark got here. So what do they decide to do? They don't send it back right away. They send it to their neighbors in the next city. Like, well, maybe it'll go better for us if we give it to them. Sort of like if you have a bad pet that's really a monster and attacks you all the time, and you decide to gift it to your neighbor because they've always wanted a dog like that. And you're like, yes, it's a lovely pet. Why don't you come and get it? How about today? I'll bring it over for you. Are you home now? So they send it on to another Philistine city, and it continues to wreak havoc. And so they keep sending it to Philistine cities. There's 5 major cities until they get to the last one. And the last one is like, the cities started to say, no, you cannot send the ark to us. We're not letting it in. Whenever people get this ark, bad things happen. You keep the ark. And they're like, no. So they eventually have this council, they have this powwow, and they have to figure out what to do with the thing. And you can almost feel the consternation, the frustration. And like I said, it's funny to us because it's just sort of humorous. Now, part of it that we have to wrestle with is why God afflicts them. Why does God afflict them? He's supposed to be a nice God. We worship him. We talk about him welcoming everyone. And the Philistines are sort of like, go away, we don't like you, you don't like us, you keep killing us. This isn't fair. Now, part of it is in the Old Testament, and the world is just a more brutal place than it is later. Civilization expands. This is something that Jordan Peterson comments on, and I think he's right. Like, we have lost the perspective of just how brutal life used to be. People died all the time. Infections and little cuts killed you. You cut your finger on a stone and it was often fatal. People died from diseases. They died from their teeth wearing out. The Romans used lead pipes to transport water, so almost all of them had lead poisoning. There's all kinds of things. The world was brutal. They dug up a cemetery in Greece, and over 30% of the people had intestinal parasites. They could tell from their bones and their skeletons that it was so bad that it had gotten into their bones. So the world is a brutal place. That's part of the answer. And I say that not because I want to gross you out, but because I think we need a little bit of perspective sometimes of just how far civilization has come and just how developed things are. Even smallish homes today are the size of palaces in the ancient world. Movies have betrayed us and given us this vision of grand halls that go on for thousands of feet with thousands of attendants and on and on and on and on. And a large home today was like the size of the palace of the emperor of the Roman Empire. It was a different sort of thing. I remember going into some of the mansions in New York this summer from the Wall Street robber barons and stuff. And, their mansions, these were the wealthiest people on earth at the time, and the mansions aren't all that big. They're nice, they're very gilded, but, you feel like you could spit and hit the front door, and that's not the impression that, you have when you think about the mansions of the Wall Street barons, when you read about them in stories, that they were like these monstrous, 50,000 square foot palaces, and that's not quite real. Part of it is that the Philistines don't worship God. There's this antagonism between them. So God afflicts them, they reject him, God afflicts them more. That's part of the battle. It seems to be that because the people don't love him, that there is this sense that sometimes we tame God too much, and we forget that he can be a bit fierce. But I think that's a good problem to think through, and it's a difficulty in the text that I can't claim to solve. We don't really have a good answer as to why God afflicts the Philistines so much, other than they were persecuting the way and the chosen people, and maybe that runs deeper than it appears in the text. So eventually they return the ark, and they send it back. They talk to their priests, their diviners, and they make 5 golden tumors and 5 mice. Now this is odd because the mice haven't been mentioned in the story yet. But somehow there must have been this plague of mice. And if you've seen a plague of mice, it's really awful. And it's creepy. They go everywhere. You can look at some of the things. Australia had this big problem a few years ago. They got a bunch of rain, and then the mice population exploded. And if you want, you can watch some of the videos. It's kind of causes brain damage at just how many mice there were and how many mice there can be. Some of you would probably die of fright if you had 1,000 mice in your home. If you opened a door, even if you see one that can just about kill you, and seeing 1,000 of them and under every rock would be traumatic. So they offer this homage to the Lord God, thinking that maybe he will stop afflicting them. And he does. But they also can't convince anyone to carry the ark, so they send it back on 2 milk cows. I think it means milk cows. I have no idea what that word means. It's usually spelled M-I-L-C-H. I don't know why. It's like the only place on earth that it's ever used. Sort of like reconnoitering. And it's like, it's a common verb in French, and it's not used in English at all, ever. Except that one passage in most Bibles. So the ark departs. The people of Beth Shemesh see the ark coming. Some people stop and look inside of the ark, and they die. They send it on to Kiriath Yearim, and it